So now let's talk about the effects of atmosphere. So like with this image, there's very little atmospheric perspective. As things go back in space, you're looking through more atmosphere, which has particles of dust in it, and that has very specific effects. It moves colors toward gray, it moves values toward the middle, it reduces contrast. And most people think, when you say atmospheric perspective, they're thinking, oh, well, landscape, cityscape, buildings in the background that are little gray squares. But atmospheric perspective happens even in the scale of rooms. It can happen in dusty, dirty garages filled with a ray of light coming through it. There's a lot of atmosphere that is everywhere and can be exploited to great effect. Think of the air. It's always a good way to think of it. You're always painting air. We are looking at all these objects through air. This is not a vacuum. And what's in that air? If there is a lot of particles, dust, water, pollen, dirt, whatever, floating around inside this air, light is hitting on all those particles. It has weight. It's aerosolized, but it's a real object that light hits and light reflects off of and can obscure what you're looking at. So this has very little atmospheric perspective. Let's say something like, here's two examples. This has very little atmospheric perspective. Here, the room, the fans are on, there's nothing in there. Here, a bug bomb went off, and now there's fog in the air. Now, look how it distorts color. It brings the darks up in value. It takes the lights down in value. It should probably also, to be correct, it should soften edges. So a lot of these edges that I have painted should probably be softer. Like that edge is too hard. This all gets softer. Now, if things are quite thick in there, I could even exploit the idea of atmospheric perspective to bring this forward by saying this is brighter, this has a harder edge, the values are a bit darker down in the front, and then exaggerating that this goes even further away by making this even more in the middle value. So what this has is it starts to not really confuse what is in light and shadow. I mean, we still see that, but light and shadow are much closer together. So let's see how that would work here. I'm going to talk about this trick here in a minute, but in a nutshell, that's what would happen. But I know this is done a lot in digital art where things that are in the background, you just take a large brush and kind of blot it out, but there's no real consideration of the effect of the edges and color. So for instance here, all these edges getting much softer, some of these shapes losing their identity entirely. And so I really did have to repaint what's back here in a slightly different way. And like that edge, still too hard. So there's a lot of painting that has to go on. You can't just take a big airbrush and blot things out. But it does affect the types of lighting. And any type of lighting, really, if you add a lot of atmosphere to Rembrandt, what you're going to get is these darks will be more affected than anything. And you'll see these darks lightening up, but the lit side will shine through. I think most of the time in atmospheric perspective you do see the effect on the darks more than the lights, even though that would be a little bit lighter as well. But often strong atmospheric perspective has the effect of unifying a picture, and there's quite a bit of atmospheric perspective going on here. If there was nothing in between us and that hair, you'd be seeing full value range, like here. If that hair is black, it's black, but here it's not. Now I'm assuming that it is, but there are some areas that we can assume would go entirely black because there's an absence of light, no reflected light, no way any light source can get to it, and that would be going black. So by that assumption, there is something in the atmosphere here. Another thing that tells me there's a lot of stuff in the air is how diffuse a lot of these edges are. There's very few hard edges. So throwing some stuff into a smoke machine can be very helpful if you're after a specific effect. It does have a nice unifying and softening effect that can be very effective. And we're all concept artists here. We know how we use and abuse this idea all the time. So atmospheric perspective is not just an optical or naturalistic thing that you can exploit in painting buildings that are a long way away. Atmospheric perspective is something you can exploit in drawings. And look at how much contrast there is in this foot to this foot. Now this is an artificial exaggeration of the principles of atmospheric perspective to gain depth. Now how is it this foot is rendered with the same line weights and contrast as this hand, and yet this is darker? Well, it's in shadow, yes, but it's a matter of manipulating things to get the viewer to look at what you want them to look at. See how this line is entirely broken, there's nothing there. A clod like me was going to draw this, I would have just said, well, the arm is there, just connect it. There's no fog back there, there's not a fog bank. A better drawing like this, which is done by Harry Carmine, wonderful art center artist. He was teaching when I was a student there, but I never had his class, and I've always regretted that, even though he's so advanced and I was such a noob that probably to this day I still wouldn't understand what he was trying to teach, but I can at least look at his drawings and see what's going on. This arm back here, is this some amazing colossal transformer and there's like a cloud bank moving in? No! This is all just atmospheric perspective, but applied to drawing. So it's something that is a very powerful depth cue that you can use even though it might not be technically, naturalistically correct. Look at this. One leg on top of the other leg. And if you're going to paint this, think of the implications for painting this. These edges would be softer, there'd be less contrast back here, fewer details, same thing with the leg there. So it transfers over, and the same thing I was doing here. You have to paint this in a different way than what's up here. And I can manipulate my edges and my values and my contrast, everything at my disposal to get these knees to come out and this to stay back.